Hi Honu Honi fam, it's Becks here. Today we're going to talk to you about how to wax your surfboard. Now, not all surfboards need to be waxed. If you have a foam board that you're using, they don't need wax on them. Generally what we're talking about is our hard boards, so epoxy resin, wooden boards, or polyurethane resin as well. This is the board we're going to be waxing today. This is a 6/8, I think, a fun board from NSP. So this is going into our fleet of boards for our surf camp crew to try and surf on, try and use during their week-long camps. So we're going to wax it up so it's all ready for the next group of surfers that come through our surf camp. So before we jump into actually waxing the board, we're going to talk about wax and which one you should be using. So most brands will have different temperature wax ratings. The reason that they're rated by temperature is basically the warmer the weather, the more likely the wax is to melt. So in hotter areas, what you'll get is really tough, hard wax that is going to be way less likely to melt when exposed to the heat. And in cooler areas like where we are in Victoria, we go for cool temperature waxes like this one here because it doesn't get that hot here. So we can go with a slightly stickier kind of wax that lets us stick to the board a little bit better in our cooler temperatures. So out of the waxes that I have in my hand, I am going to use 2 of them. So the first one we are going to be using is this one, which is a warm to mid or mild tropical, I should say, hard wax. So this one has a very high melting point. The reason that I'm going to use this on my board to start off with is as a base coat. So this is going to put down a hard level of wax to start off with. And then what we're going to do is go over it with our temperature appropriate wax, which is the cool to mid warm for this area. And that's going to be like a sticky top coat so that we can stick to it a bit better. But we'll always have our kind of harder base coat that's not going to melt, hopefully, unless you leave it in the sun for a while, so that we won't have to re-wax this board entirely for hopefully a really long time. In terms of which brands of wax to use, that's up to you. We're using the Mr. Zog Sex Wax today, and that is probably the wax that I'd say we use 80% of the time. The other 20% of the time we use cream wax, which is made by Robbie Page, who was a pro surfer back in his day, and he hand pours them up in, I think, Queensland somewhere, maybe New South Wales. I'm not 100% sure where he's based, but he makes his own wax. So when we can get our hands on his, we love to use that because it's supporting First Nations businesses. But when we can't, Mr. Zog's Sex Wax is available most places. It's pretty easy to get our hands on, so that's what we're using today. I do also have a wax comb with me. This is not super essential for a brand new freshie for getting the wax on. Just towards the end, we might use it to rough it up a little bit. But definitely if you've got a second-hand board that you're waxing and you need to get the wax off first, you will need a wax comb. And we'll make another video to show you how to actually de-wax your board as well. So when our wax is brand new, they just look like that, a little circle disc. And I'm going to show you how to apply it onto the board. There isn't a super right or wrong way to do it. You could just kind of go for it if you wanted to, but I'm going to show you my personal favorite way to do it, just so that it looks beautiful, as well as making sure we've got really even coverage. So step 1 of waxing your board is identifying where you actually need the wax. So the wax is what prevents us from slipping off our board when it's wet. So we're obviously going to need a patch down here where our feet are going to go. We're going to need some up on the sides here where our hands are going to go when we are doing our pop-up. Depending on the board is going to dictate how far up the board you need to go. So this particular board is a 6/8. We're probably not going to be doing any nose riding or anything like that on it. So I'm not going to need to wax much higher than that line there because my feet probably aren't going to step too much further forward. if this were, say, a nice big log that we're going to try and walk up and down and play on, we'd be waxing the entire length of the board to make sure that we cover absolutely everything off. I'm a big fan of waxing, or maybe over waxing a little bit. I like to make sure I have a really broad coverage range, even in spots where hopefully your feet won't be landing. There's two reasons for this. One is basically it just makes you more able to practice. So if you pop up and your feet don't quite land in the right spot, but the wax is there, you're going to stick, you might have time to adjust that foot back into the right position and keep going, which is ideal. Versus when I learned, and this is maybe reason number 2, is that I've been scarred. When I learned to surf, what I did was I waxed a patch at the back where my back foot was meant to land, a patch closer up to the middle of the board where my front foot was meant to go, and tried to just aim for those. And the number of times I hurt myself because I missed where my feet were meant to land and so slipped and hit myself on the board. It was really, really off-putting, and it turned me off surfing for at least a few months. So once I sucked it up and just waxed my whole board and stopped trying to force myself to land those 2 spots, I got much better, much more quickly, because when I made a mistake, I was able to correct and keep going with that ride, which meant more waves, more practice, more improvement. So wax as much as you think you need. If you're really worried that you're gonna need to wax the nose of a shorter board, go for it. Just do what feels best for you. Now, I should say as well, the wax goes on the top of the board, okay? It goes on the part where you're gonna be standing, where your feet are gonna be, where your hands are gonna be. You do not need any wax or anything on the bottom of the board. It's just not necessary. So if you wanna use your wax to make a line or a mark, either at the end or up the top, as far as you want to go up and down, you're welcome to do that. But basically what we're going to start by doing is making a massive grid up and down the board. So we're just drawing diagonal lines with the wax. I don't know if that's going to be showing up too well on the camera for you. There's just a little bit of wax coming off, well, except for there, in each spot. And we're making the diagonal lines maybe about a centimetre across. So I'm going to go up the whole length of the board, making those lines, those diagonal lines up, and then we'll do the other side. So that's our basic crisscrossing done, as you can kind of see. It should look pretty messy. So what we're going to do from there is start to go over the board in a circular motion. Now, I mentioned before, if you don't want to put the time and effort into doing the crisscross, that's super fine. This just makes it a little bit neater, which is something that I like, but there's no reason you couldn't just kind of rub the wax over the board if you wanted to. So we're going to do a fair few layers of this. I'm going to start off with the hard wax, and then as we start to get our lumps all over the board, then I'm going to swap over for the last couple of layers to my cool to mid wax. So for this, to get hopefully nice even bumps, what we're doing is just moving it in a circular motion over our crisscross. And you can see it starts to come up a little bit like that in the middle. So that's pretty much what we're going for. So I'm going to go up and down the whole board now, going one way, and then I'll swap and go the opposite direction. It is a nice arm workout, and it's going to take, depending on the size of your board, maybe between 10 and 20 minutes to do the full job, or half an hour if you're being super meticulous about it. So just be aware of that. So this is how we are looking after layer 1. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it over the white. So I'm going to do one more layer of my base coat, going the opposite direction with my movement, and then going to go over it with our temperature appropriate wax. I'm going to do one more layer on this board. I don't know if you can see, maybe not. The wax is just a little bit risen, so it's in little dots of lifted up wax, so that when we are jumping up onto our board, that is what our feet are going to stick into. So basically, the more wax you have on there, the stickier it is. Now before I put on this last layer of wax, I'm going to use my wax comb. So I'm using the edge of it that looks like a comb. And what I'm going to do is just scrape my wax so that I'm making little ridges in it, basically so there is more space for this to kind of get stuck into it and create more hold for me as a surfer, or for our surf camp clients when they're jumping up onto the board. So I don't know if you can see the little comb lines through there, but once we go over that one more time with the wax, it's just going to help some extra wax stick on there, which makes it better for us. So that's it. That board is beautifully waxed now, nice and sticky for anyone who wants to jump up on it. So the first few times that you surf a newly waxed board, you might find it actually really grippy, which is a good thing. It just takes a little bit of getting used to, especially if you have been riding a board that, say, hasn't been waxed in a year, which is how often I tend to wax my own boards. So I always notice a massive difference when I swap over. How often you need to re-wax it just depends on how often you use it. You can take it out exactly like this. If you do start to notice that you're not sticking to it as well as you would like, you've got a few options. You can just rough it up again with your comb before you head out, just to give you that that space to kind of stick to it a little bit more. Or you'll often see in the car park as well, surfers will usually have a bar of wax with them, and they might just go over the top of it really quickly before they jump in the water, just to give them that little extra grip. You can expect sand and kind of dirt and junk to stick into that wax as well, so be prepared for that. You can keep using it even when it gets super sandy. Just cover over the top of it. There are a lot of people that'll tell you that you should clean it off as soon as it gets too sandy, but like I said, I usually only do my boards once a year, so I'm probably not the best example for that. You probably should do it a little bit more often if you're surfing regularly. But basically, once there's more sand than wax on the board, definitely think about removing that layer of wax and starting again. And if you are new to riding hard boards, so new to riding boards with wax on them, just be mindful that that wax will melt. So if you leave that board sitting in the sun or in a car where it's hot, the wax will melt and drip all over everything. So you just need to be mindful about where you're storing it, especially in summer days. And that will, again, depend on the type of wax you use. You may have noticed the hot wax, so the tropical wax, the harder wax, was significantly harder for me to put on the board because it really takes a bit of muscle to get it to come off. Whereas that cool water wax, which is slightly softer, was much easier to go on. It sticks a lot better because it is softer, but it will melt much quicker as well. So just keep that in mind when you're choosing a spot to store your boards once you've got them nicely waxed up. If you are on the beach as well and wanting to have a rest or something like that, I recommend leaving the board upside down like that if you're getting changed or grabbing a drink or anything, just so that the wax doesn't melt while it's sitting out in the sun like that. If you have forgotten about your board and left it sitting in the sun when it's super hot and the wax has kind of gone all goopy, the easiest way to take care of it, so long as it's flat and you're near the water, is actually just to carry it out in the water and kind of dunk it in the cold water, and hopefully that will set it again. That's my my top tip for that. I've definitely done that a couple of times. But there you go, that is how to wax your surfboard. I hope you found that super helpful, team, and if you have any questions, please just drop them in the comments below. We'll see you soon.